Okay, so yeah, this is our first sociology lesson. I won't always record your class, but right now, think of me talking to you and also to your online classmates because they're seeing this same lecture. And we, if I remember correctly, on Wednesday of last week, the only thing we did was go through the syllabus. We didn't even get a definition of sociology. Is that right? We don't even have that? Okay. All right, so let's start at the very beginning, okay? So the very beginning is, this class is called sociology. Anytime you see ology on the end of a word, what does that mean? The study of something, right? So, very good. And so socio, right here, is the root word of society. The root word of social, right? Or this prefix, comes from the same root word as the root word for social, the root word for society. And so we are studying society. However, the definition is a little bit more complex than that, as I guess you could have imagined, right? So sociology is the systematic study of society and human interaction on the micro scale. There's a word that we'll define in just a second. So it's the study of society, the systematic study of society, and, there's my and sign, and human interaction in groups. The systematic study. All are key words. This word systematic has a specific meaning. Society relates to another word that we're going to talk about, and then this concept, human interaction, also relates to yet a third concept that's important to remember for this first discussion. Okay. So, we'll come to systematic later. Let's talk about society. The society level of sociology is called macro sociology, macro scale, macro level. All of those words can be used interchangeably. They mean the same thing. So society level is macro level, macro scale, macro sociology. Any or all of the above words mean society level. This is the big picture. It's the big picture. It's trends across entire populations. We study society on the macro scale, macro sociology, macro level, any of those words, interchangeably. We're looking at the big picture, a big snapshot of a huge grouping of people in a society as a whole, entire populations. If we want to know trends in behaviors of people in Arkansas, and I don't know the population of the state of Arkansas. Anybody know? 3 million something. It's a little bit around 3 million. So that's a huge, big picture of society. The entire population is what we're talking about here. Okay, and that's society. We do study that, and as a matter of fact, that's what we're going to focus on the most at the very beginning of this class, because in my long experience of doing this class, I've noticed that my students, and me too, it's easier for us to think about ourselves. This is the ourselves level. It's harder to make a connection between how our daily lives are directly affected by this macro level stuff that doesn't really seem like it might not seem as though we are controlled to a certain extent. Look at my air quotes when I say the word controlled, by the structure of society at the macro level. So we'll do that. Yes, ma'am.
So like the macro level was like the big picture of Arkansas. So like a small picture would be like bauxite of 200. That would be a small level.
That will be somewhere in between. That'll be somewhere in between, like one city, for instance. So the question is, if macro level, if an example is Arkansas, which I used, would one city like bauxite be micro, and no is the quick answer. It's like somewhere in between.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So no is the quick answer. So the human interaction in groups part. This is called micro level sociology. Micro scale, micro level, micro sociology. All of those words can be used interchangeably, and they mean the same thing. This is the you and me level. This is the small groups, such as this class, such as co-workers in a small office, or servers at a restaurant or something. Everybody who's on their shift at Chick-fil-A right now, small group. You and the people with whom you live on a daily basis. You and your BFF. You and your day alone on a rainy Saturday watching TV and interacting with the messages that are coming across Netflix, for instance. So that's the micro level, small groups. Okay? So it's systematic study. It's systematic because we use the scientific method. We will spend a little bit of our class time, probably Wednesday, we'll spend a little bit of our class time talking about the scientific method. It's the same one that you learned in the 5th grade before you did your science project. It's the same one that your chemistry lab uses when you're setting everything up and conducting your experiments for a grade. It's the same scientific method because sociology is what we call a social science. It's a social science. We try to be as exact about our social science as possible. But, let me see, how should I break this to you gently? Well, let me ask you a question. Are people always truthful in their behavior? No way. A lot of times people are not truthful in our behavior. We don't always put the true nitty-gritty on Instagram, and we're not exactly, posting on, if y'all use Facebook. Do y'all use Facebook, young folks? Yeah, a lot of times young folks don't a lot. Anyway, on social media, we're not exactly posting reality about ourselves. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues, Dr. Latimer, y'all take him for music, not music, art, sorry. Anyway, this morning, I was telling him, I'm going to record the class. He's like, why do you do that? And so we had this conversation. He's like, I tried that one time, but he hated to see himself on the video, and so he didn't post it, and I'm like, oh well, it's reality, Yeah, I review these videos, I do the things, and I say, and I say, and I sound silly, and I pause the video, and I'm going like this or something, So no, it's not, this is not about like polishing up an image for somebody to see online like we do on Instagram. We don't, send the picture out that has, we have a hanger and we didn't fix it, right? We don't post that one for our social media, okay? So please be careful with this as you walk by. Sorry. Okay, so anyway, we try to be as exact a science as possible in sociology, but we have to remember that we as people don't always present not only the appearance, which was my example, but does your behavior change just a little bit if you are at work and you didn't realize your supervisor was there and all of a sudden you see her and you're like, oh, does it change a little bit? So your behavior changes from one situation to the next, and there are all kinds of outside variables that can affect that. So we use, it's interesting to apply the scientific method to something like a social science, because how can you really control for variables that you want to test for when we all have our personalities in the mix, we all have our vanity, I guess you would say, in the mix, our egos, right? So So sociology is a systematic study of society and human interaction in small groups, both of them, and the crossover in between, like a small town or something. But we always use the scientific method to try to get as accurate data as possible. So I'm telling you this because in this class, we are going to talk about a lot of trends across entire populations. Some of those trends across entire populations you might not have experienced in your lifetime because maybe you're not in that population. What if a social scientist who is working for some kind of product company who's trying to find a target market, have y'all taken business classes? Your target market, like who do you want to sell it to? So if you are trying to market a product to 65 to 75-year-old women, there's a trend across an entire population, 65 to 75-year-old women. You're not one of them, right? So we might talk about some trends across entire populations, and you're like, what? I don't believe all that because I've never seen that. I've seen a lot. Ain't seen that. But we will talk about these trends across entire populations. We will talk about the big picture, and sometimes the big picture won't include your particular spot, you know what I mean, in society as a whole. So I say the big picture trends across entire populations. So yeah, it might not actually touch you, the trend we're talking about. But please be confident that I'm not just up here telling you, I think it must be this way. Yeah, I'm going to teach these people that this is how society is just because I have a feeling. I got a gut feeling that stuff is the way that I'm going to tell them it is. No, that will never happen. Actually, the trends, the behaviors that we observe, the people that we're going to read about in our reading assignment that you took a picture of or wrote down, those trends and the behaviors that are observed about people in small groups have been developed over time using scientific method practices so that you can be confident that the statistics, the trends, the facts are as accurate as possible, okay? The scientific method has all those checks and balances in there to make sure that we're talking about, what are the words, valid and reliable information. Remember, so we'll have some more time, I think, on Wednesday to talk about that just a little bit more. Okay, questions while I'm erasing? Am I ready to erase? Y'all need a picture of it or written down everything? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, or you just talking about specific individual groups, or like Professor Latimer said when I was in this class that they target individual single household parents, moms, stuff like that, as far as what products they use.
Absolutely. There might be all kinds of target markets and yeah, single parent households. Not only do we try to sell you certain things, not only do we try to sell certain things to certain groups because we want to fill a need and make money, right? Money. But also maybe we know that certain populations have certain needs or certain disadvantages and we want to fill in that gap to to help. So we have something like a single parent scholarship and things like that. So all of those things, nobody just sits back and says, I have a gut feeling that single parents have a hard time and we need to help them out with a scholarship just for them. That's not the decision-making process, right? We use data to determine those decisions, and sociology is one of those methods that we use. It's one of those things that you need to be really good at if you're a policymaker, because you have to understand your market, you have to understand your group that you're making policies for, right? Okay, so let's talk about, so we're still talking about the macro level of sociology and the micro level of sociology, okay? Because there's a connection If you are under the impression that they are two different things and we only study macro or we only study micro, then let me correct that if I made it seem that way. Because there's always a connection between macro forces, macro trends, and you and me on a daily basis, okay? So there's a couple of different concepts we need to talk about here. One of the concepts is called a social fact. A social fact. Now, the word fact usually, well, what's a synonym for the word fact? A truth, okay? So just in normal conversation, the word fact usually means a truth. It doesn't really mean that here. So I'm not going to write on the board that we need to redefine fact in this case, but you might want to put a note to yourself in the margin someplace that fact here doesn't necessarily mean truth. Fact here means more like situation. Or maybe reality. Oh, good. Yes, you're using a vocabulary word from later on, a norm. Yeah. So I like reality. So fact here means more like reality rather than truth. You can put that kind of in your margin notes because it's not part of the definition, but I think it'll help you understand what the definition is talking about. If you think of this word fact here as the word reality, a social reality, okay? So a social fact or social facts plural, these are patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that exist on the macro level and control individual behavior to a certain extent on a micro level. Okay, so these patterns that exist on the macro scale, they affect society as a whole. That's what this is saying. So social facts or social reality, if you want, the term is social facts, okay? But if you think of the word fact here as reality, every society has, Max used the word norms, every society has ways of thinking that are considered, here's my air quotes, normal, or within like a range of normal. They have pattern ways of feeling. What emotional response are we supposed to have? If someone gets hit by a car in the street, are we supposed to laugh? No. I mean, are we supposed to walk away? No, we're supposed to assist, right? Like there is this understanding that you will that you will feel, compelled to assist another human being, right? Okay, acting is our behavior. So these patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that exist on the macro scale, these are assumptions about normal behaviors. These patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and acting on the macro scale. And it controls our individual behavior. We will either be normal patterns. Or we will be something called deviant, not abnormal, but deviant, if we don't follow it. Okay. So I kind of put sentence fragments or fragments of what I was saying on the board off in the margins. If I need to repeat any of the longer stuff, I kind of wrote fragments there. Okay. So social facts guide us in our decision making and in our activities throughout our lives. For instance, when you think about your individual behavior about being in college right now at your stage of life, that's your individual behavior, right? Here you are with me. You certainly, I'm going to guess, would rather not be in a class at 8 a.m. on a Monday, Wednesday morning. But why are you here if you can think about it not just in, well, I chose this class, I made a schedule, and here I am at 8 a.m. Don't think in that terms. Think about on the macro scale. Is there some kind of, can I use the word force? Is there some kind of controlling mechanism bigger than you, bigger than your family, bigger than this town, that kind of tells you you gotta go to college?
Yes.
Such as, like, what am I talking about? Or what are the pattern ways of thinking, feeling, and acting? Like, what is your overall purpose for college right now? To get a job. If you could get a job in a career field that you like, with earning potential that sounds good to you, promotion potential that sounds good to you over time, if you could get that right out of high school, many people, not all, would go straight into that. But society is not patterned that way. So y'all have to end up here. Or someplace. Thank you for ending up here. Y'all have to end up someplace because you're really following, were you really in control of that choice that you made to be in college right now? And sometimes our parents tell us, if you're going to live in this house, you're going to be in school. How many got that talk? Anybody? Yeah. You can live in this house, but you're going to be in school. Is it because they're just jerks and they don't understand and they've never been 19 before? Or is it because they are responding also to the knowledge that society as a whole requires this college education for you to get in the range of decent jobs? Is there also a pattern way of thinking, feeling, acting that affects males versus females differently?
Yes.
In lots of different ways, but let's use the workforce as an example really quick, since we did a minute ago. You're in college because of work life, the economy, right? You're in college because of that. So how, if we overlap another pattern way of thinking, we think males are different than females. So with that pattern way of thinking about males and females being different, having different interests, different talents, different emotional structures, then in the job force, when I say construction worker, is it a male or a female that you think of?
Male.
When I say daycare worker, is it a male or female that you can think of? Typically female. You can start that answer with the word typically. Because can a female apply for a construction job?
Yes.
Sure. There's no regulation that says a female can't apply for that construction job, but would the macro scale knowledge about what a female, and I'm sorry for all my air quotes, but should want in life, do you diminish or do damage to your femininity if you are a construction worker or an oil rig worker or a roofer or some kind of job, is there like, do we question like, why does she want to do that work? And if a dude wanted to work at a daycare or be an elementary school teacher or something like this, does he diminish, does he do damage to his masculinity? Or do we, maybe it shouldn't, but see, yeah, maybe it shouldn't. But are there patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that guide our individual behavior, even though we want to say, oh, I want to live in a place where it doesn't matter? But it kind of does. We've learned over time since we were born up until now that it kind of does matter, right? The little kids, I'm sorry, who? Yeah.
On a macro level.
On a macro level.
We assume that that's abnormal behavior.
What?
For a man to work at a
Oh, to have the desire? Okay. So right, that's why I've got words like thinking, feeling, and acting. So the action of working at a daycare puts question, like, what's he feeling? Like, what's he thinking? Why does he want that? He making $8 an hour, he could make $28 an hour. On this other, just a second, what's happening? Ew. Did we kill it? Okay, I will let them know. Thank you. Sorry, there was a little bit of a bug emergency for the online students. A little bit of a gross bug emergency, but it's taken care of now. That's what the kerfuffle was. Great. I said the word kerfuffle. There's no way YouTube is going to get that word right when they're doing the captions. Anyway, and if I could spell it, I would write it on the board right now, but I can't spell it either. I guess I shouldn't bother YouTube with it. Anyway, okay, we good? Okay. Bug emergency curtailed. So yeah, we have, patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. And I'm sorry, were we finished with your question when the bug happened? Okay. And when does it start? Maybe it starts on the individual level. What if a dad of a 3-year-old girl takes her to the playground and the 3-year-old girl falls and gets, bloodies her knee up or whatever? What's the little girl gonna do? Cry. What's daddy gonna maybe do? Console her. He's probably going to pick her up and say, come here, sweetheart, daddy will make it better. Daddy will make it better. Now, is this a universal thing? Am I saying that every single person, every single dad is going to do that with his daughter? No, but the trend across the board is that that's most likely what's going to happen. Okay? Same dad, now let's make it a 3-year-old son who falls and gets the same injury on his knee, and what's the 3-year-old son going to do? He's human. He's going to do the same thing. As the little girl's going to cry, that stuff hurts. Is a man supposed to cry, though? Not according to the norm. Not according to the pattern. So maybe, would the dad's response maybe be different with the 3-year-old boy than the 3-year-old girl? And so we're talking about individual behavior here, but is it because that dad just likes girls better than he likes boys? Or is it because that dad is responding to macro scale patterns that not only he learned in his lifetime, but he knows his boy has to learn it? Who's supposed to teach him? Dad and Arnold Schwarzenegger or Wesley Snipes or whoever I'm dating myself. Those are like my action stars. But anyway. Right? So, yeah, so it doesn't, we don't even just have to talk about the workforce, which is a macro scale thing, or the economy, which is a macro scale thing, but just attitudes in general about toughness or tenderness, kindness, or what is it that dads say? Rub dirt in it, walk it off or whatever. And we're about to see the Super Bowl next week. I assume y'all are going to follow that American way of watching the Super Bowl. Now you're going to work during it. And you can either pick up an extra shift, or most people are watching the trend across the board on the macro scale is that most people watch the Super Bowl. And there's going to be a whole bunch of tackling and a whole bunch of hits and a whole bunch of ouch, but they get right up and walk off. Are they going to show their ouch? No, that's not masculine. They're not going to show their ouch. They're not going to cry about it. We do have a couple of really young NFL players who have retired recently.
Blue kick.
Was the media nice to them when they retired early? They're 28. He's 28, right?
Blue kick.
Yeah. So he's like 28, and retires, and the media was not kind.
Wow.
Is it because people in the media are jerks, or are they following this overarching pattern way of thinking, feeling, and acting that we inherited at birth? We inherited this at birth. The people who rear us, you rear human beings, by the way, you raise animals and you rear human beings. So the people who reared us, the people who taught us in school and the shows that we watched on TV and the kids that we played with on the playground and all that kind of stuff that brought us to where we are today, everybody was responding to this, and they taught it to us subtly. Subtly. Don't hit a girl. What if she hauls off and smacks the daylights out of you? Yeah, I mean, you're shocked that I would even suggest it'd be okay to smack the daylights out of her. Because you're responding to this patterned way of thinking, feeling, and acting that we learned. I mean, SpongeBob teaches us this. The reason the American Guy TV show is funny is because it goes against some of this. It's where we get comedy from. Going against appropriateness in society. So, social facts, this is a major concept that we will come back to time and time again during this class. And these social facts are a good way, once you understand the definition, and you can see that in the definition, this combines macro level stuff and micro level stuff. So macro level is large, trends across the board. Micro level is you and me, but we are never you and me without this stuff being an umbrella over us to guide how you and I are you and me. Okay? Sir?
It's just making me think of, as a veteran, I've served 6 years in the military, and
Thank you for serving.
it's my pleasure. I spent 4 of those 6 years in a war zone, and we had to deal with a lot of social training prior to going to those war zone areas.
Excellent
And
point.
the reason was because their way of thinking on the macro level, and it's making more sense to me now, because then we were just following orders. But on the macro level, they had a way of thinking that was a norm to their society. And even though we were sent there to assist them, I would say we had a lot of pushback.
Absolutely.
Because we were trying to change their thinking on the individual level, but their society says
Doesn't allow that.
it doesn't allow
Okay, so I'm sure that this is being recorded, so let me just repeat a little bit because it doesn't pick up outside voices yet, and or very well. So we have a veteran who was sort of retrained to be in another location, another culture, and that's why we say social facts are pattern ways of thinking and feeling and acting. But is the social climate the same everywhere? The answer is no. And so that's why I wanted to make sure you knew that this word fact does not mean truth right now, it means a reality. So you're describing a different social reality that existed in the place where you were deployed. And to prepare you for that, you had some training about, hey, here's social reality there. I'm not sure if your military training used the word social fact.
just sociology.
Just sociology, right? Exactly. Yeah, this field is vital for so many different career choices, and the military, is one of them. So so the social reality was different in the place that you went, and you had to have a crash course on, hey, what is the macro level way of thinking, feeling, and acting over there? Because it's definitely going to conflict with what you learned was the pattern way of thinking, feeling, and acting. Absolutely. And because you're trying to work with one individual at a time, it's not easy to break free of the matrix. Can I use that metaphor? We've all seen those movies, right? It's not easy to step back and be like, oh, now I see the pattern that's controlling me. Now I understand why it's there and what its purpose is. And now I see how I behave in relationship to that. And it's not easy. Because, we might not like the idea that there is, a bias against males being able to express their feelings openly and still be considered masculine. That stinks, because human beings have feelings. Males are human beings, right? Females are not more human in the emotion department than males are. But our society kind of says, wipe it away, walk it off, whatever, rub dirt in it, whatever, right? Put up with the pain, that kind of thing. And so that's the way that we teach each other and expect each other to live, right? Okay. So this concept of social facts is a very important concept. We of course, all of this that we're talking about right now is going to be used on test 1. But also this concept of social facts is something that you can possibly write about. It sounds like we've got a great reaction paper in the works over here from past military experience in any movie like The Matrix that I just mentioned. If you want to analyze it from this point of view, any of these topics that we're discussing right now are great for a reaction paper for this week.
Songwriter.
I'm sorry?
Songwriter, where she was an agent.
See, that's another one I haven't seen, but like the video game Tomb Raider, I mean, I know that it's based on a video game. If you can relate, I don't have to have seen the movie for you to be able to explain it to me from this lens, if you want to use a movie or a video game or song lyrics or whatever. Okay? So, or just personal experience. You don't have to have an outside source in every single paper. Okay, so another concept with a unique vocabulary word, and we're going to have to relearn what the word imagination means. Okay? So just in everyday conversation, if somebody talks about their imagination, what does their imagination mean? Things that your mind can come up with. I heard somebody say something over here. It's things that you can think of in your mind, maybe make-believe, right? Maybe creativity has to do with your imagination. Those kinds of words typically are what we use the word imagination for just in regular conversation. But are we having regular conversation right now? No, we're not. We're having, this is class time, and if you're not taking notes, then you're not doing it right, right? Because regular conversation, we don't take notes about what people talk about. We're having class right now. So also this word imagination, just like the word facts in that case doesn't really mean truth. It means kind of reality. And in this case, imagination does not mean make-believe or what we can come up with, you know, creatively. Imagination has a new meaning also.
Concept?
It's the ability to think. It's the ability to put concepts together. I like that. Yeah, so it's the ability to put concepts together. Let me give you like a formal definition of it. Oh, yeah, I'll repeat that too if you want to put it in your margin notes. In this case, imagination means your ability to put concepts together. Actual, like, truthful concepts together. But that's not the official definition, but that's just a new way you have to think about the word imagination in this context. Okay, so the sociological imagination is the ability to see the connection between macro-scale social issues and micro-scale personal issues.
Do you think lawyers fall under that category?
Do I think what is?
Lawyers or people, sort of judges.
Oh, I see what you mean. You mean who needs to use this to do their job well?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm like, the better we are at developing our sociological imagination, think about sociological imagination as something you need to develop over time. We've only seen each other twice now, and I will be really surprised if any of you already have the ability to think sociologically. Because this is a new way of thinking. In my experience, most of my students are like, I have never, regularly I get the, wow, I never thought of it that way before, kind of reaction. So the sociological imagination, the more developed our ability, the more we practice at taking ourselves kind of out of the situation, our personal issues, sometimes they seem subjective, and macro scale social issues are objective. What's the difference between those two words, subjective and objective?
Almost as if for and against, in a sense. Subjective is individually.
Subjective is individually, like you put your own opinions in it, you put your own beliefs in it, you put your own attitudes, you put all those into your subjective ideas.
And macro or objective is just, it's not biased.
Objective, good. I like the way you describe that. So objective is not biased in a personal sense. It should be more universal, something that's objective. So if we think of macro scale stuff as being social facts and micro scale stuff as being personal issues as being the human behavior that we engage in on a daily basis, what we need to start practicing in this class is we need to practice stepping back. If we are having a personal issue, such as employment right now for people who are about 10 years older than y'all, so they have finished their degrees, and a lot of times they have a difficult time finding the kind of job that they want. They have to take a job that they really didn't plan for because the job that they want is still occupied by other people in society. For instance, I know that y'all call everybody over 35 a boomer, right? I know y'all call everybody over 35 a boomer, but the baby boomers are a generation that we're smack dab in the middle of. There are some baby boomers who are retiring, and other baby boomers, that's an age group, like a generation age group that babies who were born in the late 1940s and all through the decade of the 50s, at least through like 56. So the baby boomers are a huge population of a generation. They're a huge generation, and they are sticking around in the workforce. So until more of them retire, the people who are in entry-level positions right now are having a slower time moving up because we got to get grandpa to retire first so that person can move up and the new people right out of college can move in. By the time y'all finish college, this process is kind of going to be happening. And so regarding employment, you're probably not going to have the same kind of personal experiences, difficulties that is, finding the kind of job that you want as soon as you want it, because probably by that time a social issue like the entire generation of baby boomers will probably almost all be retired by that time. And they're a great big huge group of people. It's a large portion of the population in the United States, and so subsequent generations, subsequent means following generations, had smaller numbers in them. Smaller numbers. So once they're out of the workforce, it's going to leave a whole bunch of jobs open for us that you're probably not going to have the same personal issue of, why can't I find a job? I'm really sick of living in my mother's basement, or whatever, whatever personal behavior you're engaged in right now, or, the generation just older than you, to try to cope with your economic situation of not being able to have the job that you planned on. You will. I'm talking to that generation older than y'all. They will. But not until more people retire from a previous generation. So we have to see that if we are having economic struggles, like we can't find a job, Is it because you personally are a failure, or is it possibly that on the macro scale there are some other forces that are outside of our control that we're having to deal with? They affect us in our personal lives.
It could be a bit of both, depending on your life choices and styles.
Well, and that's another reason why so many people, so the life choices and styles, probably couldn't hear your voice when you were asking that. It could be part of both. I have a ton of people who tell me they're going into a medical field in their career path. Is that true for a lot of y'all? Somebody doing radiology tech or nursing, or I see a bunch of hands flashing up. All kinds, yeah, a physician or any kind of thing in between, right? I see also a ton of people who are going into like service industry jobs, like hospitality or hotel management or culinary arts. You know, be a chef or something like that, because those two areas pretty much guarantee the job that you want right now. Pretty much guarantee. And so many of you also, the profession that you chose to major in, not only did society kind of tell you, you're going to college. You know what I mean? On the macro scale, society kind of tells you, you got to go to college if you want social respect. You got to go to college if you want the salary that will get you the stuff that you want to buy. You got to go to college for lots of reasons. But once you get to college, are you going to, you know, I would actually have loved to major in philosophy, one of my favorite classes that I ever took. And I suppose I could do this same job that I have now, but probably I'm not going to be able to be like a hospital administrator, you know, make the big bucks if I got a bachelor's degree in philosophy. You also can't just stop with the bachelor's degree if you want to be that hospital administrator. You have to keep on going past that because of the shape of society. The shape of the matrix. So your personal experiences. I have the word issues here, but program in, or what's the word I'm looking for? Substitute in the word experience, substitute in the word troubles, substitute in the word successes, substitute in the word failures, substitute in all these different words for the word issue here. If you work to develop your sociological imagination, then you will be able to distinguish between a personal issue that is precisely your fault and nobody else's and is not affected by society. And let me just tell you, there are very, very, very few, if any, of those. But you will be able to distinguish what macro force, macro level social fact is controlling the personal experience that you are going through in your life throughout your lifetime.
Sort of like a psychology teacher, major can do that.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned psychology. Psychology studies human behavior, but it's more about the mechanics of your brain, your personality, individual experiences that might affect your reactions to things. And it's a very different class than sociology. In sociology, we acknowledge that people's personalities are different, but we're not going to study the type, 4 different personality types and then 4 different temperaments that go on top of that. I don't remember, right? I've had it too. I remember enough. But psychology is about human behavior, but it's definitely more on the micro level. We're studying the individual, the brain function, brain chemistry, experiences in our past that work to guide our behaviors today. In sociology, the big difference is we are looking at macro scale norms. We're looking at macro scale social facts. We're looking at forces like the economy, like government, like religion. We're looking at all of these issues that exist on the macro scale and create situations that guide our personal experiences. Sometimes make up our mind for us, like whether we go from high school into the workforce or from high school to college and what degree we choose in college. All of those kinds of things. Were you 100% in control of all those decisions? Or are macro level social facts pushing you toward those choices that you made, right? So that's a big difference between psychology and us, is we're looking at how does the structure of society, how does the structure of social groups, how did these things guide our behavior? And that kind of overlaps what our personality type is. It overlaps. Have you noticed, by the way, when you leave this room and you go to the cafe, or when you leave this room and go to work later or go home or whatever, does your behavior change? Absolutely. I mean, y'all are not going to raise your hand and ask your mama to say something, right? I mean, you have a classroom behavior, you have a eating lunch behavior, you got a work behavior, you got a hanging out with your friends behavior, you're going to have a Super Bowl party behavior or something for those of you who are going to do that this coming weekend. Your behaviors change from one social situation to the next. You, the individual, with your personality. Your personality doesn't change from one social situation to the next. Your behavior changes. And so there's macro level social forces that guide our personal experiences, guide our personal behavior. Here's another word we can substitute in there, behavior. Okay. So let's talk about where this sociology concept came from, because it's not, sociology really has not been around very long as a social science. It hasn't been around very long. In the grand scheme of history. Okay, so like for instance, that philosophy class I mentioned to y'all, you'll talk about, people from ancient Greece, like 4000 BC or something, right? There's a long time ago in history. Sociology's only been around for about 200 years, but really only about 120 or so years ago did it really take hold. Did people say, hey, there's something to this macro connection to micro stuff in society? Okay, so let's see. Okay, let me start with this. So there is a fellow named, his first name is Emile Durkheim. His first name is Emile. That's a man's name. It's a French name, Emile. Emile Durkheim is one of the famous sociologists of the past that we will talk about a lot in class this semester. Emile Durkheim is the guy who came up with the term social facts, by the way. So we've already talked about him. I just haven't named him yet. He came up with the concept social facts. Okay. So Emile Durkheim was not the first sociologist. There were several before him, but he was kind of the first sociologist who was successful in convincing people, convincing academics and other social thinkers, convincing them that society was this thing. Society is a thing. Like, we're going to look at it as a noun. We're going to use words about society as though it was a living thing. So he was the first successful sociologist to convince a large enough group of people that society is a thing that controls behavior, that right now, in 2020, we're talking about sociology and how society on the macro scale controls, or at least affects to a great extent, our behavior on the personal level. Okay? So he said society is a thing, and society has rules. Society has rules. And those rules kind of trickle down to you and me. And we can use a religious metaphor to think about this because, for instance, in monotheistic religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, in monotheistic religions, there is God, who is a thing, a person, right? An entity. And God has rules, right?
Yes.
And those are supposed to trickle down to the you and me and guide our behavior? Okay. So here's a metaphor for what he's talking about. Society is an entity. It's a thing. We're going to talk about it sometimes as though it's a living thing, a living person, because society changes over time, just like people change over time, right? And so society is think about, Durkheim was successful at convincing people that society was a controlling thing with rules. And prior to that, pretty much the only controlling thing with rules was God in people's minds. Pretty much. But he was successful at saying, wait a minute, society too is a thing. Actually, he said society instead. But you can think of society also as being a controlling thing above us that has rules that trickle down to you and me. Okay? And here is how he convinced people of this. Okay. So, he examined trends across the board, I'll say across the population, about suicide rates before and after industrialization.
I got one question.
Yes, sir.
Is he the one who gave the people a magic potion that asked them to drink and they end up following him? He's
No.
not-
Oh, no, I don't want you to think of him as a cult leader or anything. No. He didn't. No, I mean, no. Durkheim was just really influential academic person. He was the first really successful person in the academic realm to get sociology to be taken seriously as not just like a small, weird thing you could major in. You know what I mean? I don't know how to describe it more than that. But if you think about it, society was not considered a being or an entity that had rules that we had to follow on an individual basis. He was just successful in explaining it that way in terms that people could understand. People willingly adopted that way of thinking. And he wasn't the first sociologist to be talking about sociology in this way, but he was kind of the first one that really got it widespread, got that idea, got that notion widespread. Okay, so he used proof. Remember we said that this is a systematic study of society and human interaction. Okay, so back to that first definition, it's a systematic study. So he used proof, he used data and records. He looked at suicide rates before the Industrial Revolution and suicide rates after the Industrial Revolution. So industrialization here refers to the Industrial Revolution. Have y'all studied that in history class? High school history or college history? We've studied the Industrial Revolution. It's a major turning point in lifestyle, okay? So the social facts before the Industrial Revolution, can I abbreviate that with an I and an R for Industrial Revolution? The social facts before the Industrial Revolution was that everybody lived in small towns, like really small towns and rural areas. And everybody's job, everybody's education, for the most part, had something to do with small-scale farming, agriculture. You got it. So sure, there was a school in that small town, but the majority of the students that the teacher taught were farm kids. Sure, there was a bank in that small town, but the bank had a business because the farmers needed a place to put their money. Sure, there was a grocery store, but the grocery store was in business because farming families needed to sell their produce there and also buy others for a wide variety, right? So you might be a shopkeeper, you might be a dentist, you might be a school teacher, but the reason you have those jobs are all like 1 degree separated from agriculture. Also, it's very close-knit. What's that mean? Everybody knows everybody else, which doesn't sound nice, does it? Not to us. We don't want people up in our business. Everybody was up in everybody's business. That's what close-knit means. But this was a good thing to a certain extent. In hindsight, this is a good thing. If everybody's up in everybody's business, there's not a whole lot of crime going on. You're not going to get away with it because somebody's grandma's going to see it and they're going to be on the phone with your mama before, and there wasn't phone back then. But you know what I mean? Like the social control. Here's a term that we will look at in depth later, but let me write it here. Social control was informal, like, because everybody knew everybody else. So, you couldn't skip school. They'd know. You'd get in trouble. You couldn't steal candy from the grocery store very easily. Somebody would see you. They would know. And even if they didn't see you steal it, they'd see you eat. Like, where'd you get that candy? I know your mama didn't give you that nickel, right? Like, we would find you some other way, and we will correct that behavior some kind of way. So before, these were the social facts. What did we say social facts are? Reality is the word you should think of when you hear the word facts here. But what's the definition?
Certain ways of thinking, certain acting that exists
On the macro scale,
macro scale.
and guide our behaviors on the micro scale. So these are the social facts. So a small town, like you asked me earlier, is bauxite micro level? No, bauxite is going to be macro level in terms of social facts. There's going to be a pattern way of thinking, feeling, and acting, behaving in a small town rural area. And agriculture is going to be the setting, the predominant economy and profession, those kinds of things. Close-knit communities with a lot of informal social control. Informal means you might have a sheriff and a deputy, but they don't have a whole lot of work to do. You might have that job just because there's more than 10 people in your town. You might have a job of a sheriff or something, but there's not a whole lot of work for them to do because everybody knows everybody for generations. Generations of families live in the same place over time. To you and me, with our modern world after industrialization, that might sound really, really, really boring. But guess what? In this situation, suicide that Emile Durkheim was studying, pretty much non-existent. He found no records of this. And there were records. People kept town records, births and deaths and causes of deaths. There was pretty much no record of crime, let alone serious crime. Pretty much none. Yes?
Well, there was not much disparity in the different social classes and wealth.
Absolutely. It's more egalitarian. There were a whole bunch of social facts that are different. More egalitarian. Now, maybe your family is better off than mine, but you know me well enough to know that if I'm going through hard times, you're going to show up at my house with a pie and a sack of potatoes. Right? And if Miss B, who's always in that chair every morning at the Presbyterian church, if she's not there one day, are you sending your firstborn out to knock on her door right now to check on what's wrong with Miss B? Yes. So that egalitarian, or use the word disparity, the difference between people was not as predominant, not as big, Yeah, so you watched out for each other, and that's one of the reasons Emile Durkheim found through scientific inquiry that this wasn't an issue and this was not an issue. Nope. Just did not happen. And then after, got to go quickly here, I think we have 5 minutes. After the Industrial Revolution, the social facts changed. Big cities, which is called urbanization, an urban area, big cities. Nobody knew each other. When you don't know somebody, are you suspicious of them, or maybe I should say protective of yourself regarding them? We're kind of trained to do that. We teach our little kids stranger danger, right? Yes, so nobody knew each other, and so there was a whole lot of loneliness. There were huge, how do I spell lonely? There we go. There was a whole lot of loneliness. There was an absence of social networks. Absence of daily routines, an absence of the structure of the pattern that you had been familiar with. Social facts after the Industrial Revolution. Big cities, nobody knew each other, loneliness, there was an absence of social networks, social control had to go into the hands of police. Because nobody's watching me, so nobody will, and on the busy street, nobody's watching me, and so nobody will really even notice, and by the time this is gone, she doesn't even know which of the 20 people who just bumped into her is the one who stole this. And nobody saw me. Nobody saw me actually slip and take something out of his pocket as I bumped into him in order to, that's the way I'm going to make a living now. And guess what went up?
Crimes and suicides.
They ain't had cameras like this.
No, exactly. Didn't have the porch cameras, whatever those are called, Ring, whatever those things are called. Didn't have so many. But yeah, so the social facts after the Industrial Revolution, here's the structure of society, there's the structure of society, individual behavior regarding these two things, this skyrocketed, over here there was pretty much no existence of them, of those social issues. So, we're right down to the wire today, so thank you for your attention. And I will see you, when will I see you? On Wednesday. You have a ton of things to choose from for your reaction paper this week, so please